So recently I watched Death Note and I thought it was very good, but undoubtedly the plot is rather complex. But what I realised after watching it is that actually the plot is a lot easier to understand if you retell it from the perspective of the 4 notebooks. Of course there are 4 notebooks in Death Note, one belonging to Rem, Ryuk, Sidoh and Gelus respectively, and yeah, if you retell the story from the perspective of those 4 books, things become a lot clearer in terms of the plot. So that's what I'm going to do today, and we're going to start off with Sidoh. I hope you enjoy. So before the events of Death Note, Sidoh's notebook is stolen by Ryuk in the Shinigami realm, and he adds rules to the book and drops it into the human world, where of course it lands right outside of Light's window at high school, and he is the one to pick it up. So at this point, Light is now the owner of the notebook, and he uses it for quite a long time, killing quite a few criminals in the process. In fact, he uses it until the point where L is really close to his tail, and he creates a plan to erase suspicion that he is Kira. So what he does, well, Light relinquishes ownership of the Death Note, and therefore loses all of his memories pertaining to it. He then instructs Rem to give the notebook to a greedy human who will use it a lot, and that person turns out to be Higuchi of the Yotsuba group. So it remains with Higuchi for quite a while until he is apprehended by Light and L, at which point Light then touches the notebook and regains his memories. Light then kills Higuchi with the piece of the notebook hidden in his watch, and therefore becomes the rightful owner of the book again. But despite this, the Japanese task force take possession of the book, and it is kept with them for quite a long time. In fact, it remains with the task force until Chief Yagami trades it to the Mafia run by Mello in return for the kidnapped Sayu Yagami, who is his daughter. At this point, Jack Nailon, who is a Mafia member, becomes the new owner of Sidoh's notebook after using it at the beginning on a fellow gang member. He physically gives the notebook to Mello, and Mello touches the notebook quite a lot, but actually he never becomes the rightful owner because he doesn't use it. Eventually, after Sidoh comes down from the Shinigami realm into the human world, the Mafia give the notebook back to him, and he returns back to the Shinigami realm with him. The only scraps of this notebook that are still around after this point are the few scraps in Light's watch, which he does use, and he attempts to use in the warehouse right at the very end, but doesn't manage to do so. So that is the story of Sidoh's notebook. We're now going to go on to the notebook belonging originally to Gelus. Before the events of Death Note, Gelus falls in love with a human girl called Misa, and he uses the notebook to extend her life, and as a result, Gelus dies and Rem repossesses the notebook, giving it to Misa, who she believes to be the rightful owner of the notebook now that Gelus is dead. And Misa, of course, uses the notebook quite a lot until she is detained by the Japanese task force, where she gives up ownership to it to Light, and therefore loses her memories in the process as per Light's plan. At this point, Ryuk and Rem, upon Light's orders, possess each other's notebook. So now Ryuk is now attached to this notebook, and Rem was attached to the previous notebook that we talked about. And actually, Ryuk becomes the Shinigami attached to this notebook for the rest of the series. Light then buries the notebook in the forest while Misa is detained. And once they're free, he orders her to retrieve the notebook, where upon touching it, she regains her memories of it again, and then does the ideal with Ryuk. Misa then uses the notebook for the next 5 years, killing a lot of people in the process under Light's command, but eventually Light has Misa relinquish the notebook once again, stating that he wants her to be a normal wife for him. He then sends the notebook to Teru Mikami, who acts as Kira while Light is under investigation from Nier. So now Mikami is the rightful owner of the book. Mikami keeps the notebook in a safety deposit box at the bank and publicly uses a fake notebook to try and trick Nier. However, Giovanni of the SPK discovers the real notebook, thanks largely to Mello, and gives it to Nier, who eventually burns it, removing it from the human world. And that is the end of Gelus's notebook. So we're now going to move on to the notebook originally belonging to Rem. So Rem's notebook is in her possession from the beginning of the series, quite a while, in fact to her death. She eventually uses it to kill Watari and L, and therefore dies because she unnaturally extended Misa's life and therefore fell in love with her, so the rules mean that she turns to dust. Light then retrieves the notebook from Rem's ashes and therefore becomes the owner, and is the owner all the way throughout the 5-year gap through the time skip. So then the time skip occurs and Light gives the notebook to the Japanese task force, which is to be used against the Mafia, and Chief Yagami becomes the holder of the notebook but doesn't actually use it in the showdown with Mello. After Chief Yagami dies, the Japanese task force reclaim control of the notebook, and Aizawa eventually brings the notebook to the warehouse in the final episode, where once again it is burnt by Nier and removed from the human world. The final notebook we're going to be talking about, and probably the least eventful one, is Ryuk's. Ryuk's notebook doesn't get used pretty much at all throughout the entire series. It just gets held by Ryuk and nothing much happens to it. The most notable thing, though, that happens with this notebook is this is the eventual notebook that Ryuk writes Light's name in the final episode. This is the notebook that kills Light. So, to summarise, because I know I went through that very quickly, we're going to go through each notebook and I'll tell you who was the owners. Sidoh's notebook was first of all owned by Sidoh, of course. It then goes into Light's possession, then Higuchi's possession, then back into Light's possession, then into Jack Nailon, the Mafia member's possession, and then finally back into Sidoh's possession. Gelus's notebook gets given to Rem, which then gets given to Misa, which ends up in Mikami's hand, and then is destroyed by Nier at the warehouse. Rem's notebook is given to Light and ends up getting destroyed by Nier as well, but also Aizawa and Chief Yagami have possession of it but never actually use it, and Ryuk's notebook is in his hands and control the whole time. I went through that all rather quickly, but hopefully it did make sense. I certainly understand the plot of Death Note a lot better now after hearing about these 4 notebooks and understanding their journey throughout their respective owners. So anyway, hope you enjoyed. I'll be back with more anime related videos very, very soon. I'll see you around.